We're here with presidential candidate for the Republican nomination, Dr. Ben Carson. Dr. Carson, we did our introductions before we went on camera. So happy that you were able to take some time with us for the N Lefty program. We come out of Des Moines, and really happy to meet you. Really happy to hear it, to answer a few questions. I was looking at some of the news reports, and you recently said a couple of days ago that you thought that should you win the nomination and ultimately the election, that you'd probably be a one-term president because the agenda that you were going to push through might not lend itself to a second term. I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on what you meant by that, and also specifically if you have some examples of the policies that might lead you to be a one-term president.
Well, we would clearly have to go to the heart of the matter, not just play around the edges as is usually done, because people want to remain popular and they start running for re-election as soon as they get there. You know, we're going to have to do things like change the mission of several government agencies, the Environmental Protection Agency being a prime example. Right now, it is seen primarily as an agency that puts its foot on the neck of everybody, threatens them. And what I would change the mission to is an organization that works with business, industry, academia to find the cleanest, most environmentally friendly ways of exploiting our tremendous energy resources and other resources, and change the definition of a lot of agencies so that instead of becoming persecutory, they actually work in conjunction with society in order to get things accomplished. I would also be talking about reducing the size of government. You know, we have 4.1 million federal employees. That's way too many. We have 645 federal agencies and sub-agencies. Way too many. I would be looking at the benefits of such agencies versus the cost of such agencies. And if they don't pass the benefit-to-cost ratio, major alterations and reductions would take place.
I think that, where do you think the pushback would come from then? Do you think it would come from more the
Special interest groups.
Special interest groups? Not necessarily from Congress, but from outside Beltway?
I think the special interest groups will do everything they can to try to hurt you and to demonize you. You know, I have stayed away from special interest groups during this campaign, not accepting money from them, have stayed away from billionaires who want to influence your policies. I don't want anything to do with them, because you can pretty much be guaranteed that when something comes out of Washington and it doesn't make any sense, it's because there's a special interest group involved.
Do you suppose that maybe some of this agenda that you've been advocating recently has contributed to at least what appears to be superficially a slip from your high watermark in the polls nationally over the summer, and seeing some of that support seemingly kind of erode and maybe be reallocated to other candidates? Yeah,
I think probably a lot of that is secondary to some of the terrorist activities that have occurred, and there's a false narrative that a person who is relatively calm and quiet cannot be a tough person who fights against such things. And that, of course, is completely false. And that is a narrative that I must fight. I have started fighting it by helping people to understand that strength is not necessarily defined by the decibels with which one says something, but rather by the accomplishments in one's life. You look, if you want to see a strong person, you look through their life and you see what they've been able to accomplish, not what they've been able to talk about.
Are you referring to anybody specifically?
I think that's just a general premise that will give people a lot of guidance.
I was, in preparation for this, I talked to a couple of friends, and I thought, hey, if you had an opportunity to ask Dr. Carson a question about a specific issue, and one of my friends said that she wanted to get your thoughts on some of the wage issues for women, and whether or not you accepted the idea or believed in the gender pay gap, and if you had any specific policies that would address that either way.
Well, you know, I totally think that there should be equal wages for equal work. Doesn't matter who's doing it. And I wouldn't say that I believe that there's some kind of awful thing that's going on, but I do believe that we have to pay attention to all the people in our society and ensure that we are being equitable and fair if they're doing the same kinds of jobs. You know, I recognize that in my particular case, my success is attributable to women. So, you know, I'm the last person who's going to be dumping on women.
Well, I think that's a smart move for everybody. Do you believe that government has a role to play either through legislation or through, I don't want to use the bugaboo regulation, but maybe there's some legislation that can be passed to address some of these imbalances?
I'm not sure that it's so much legislation as it is just doing the right thing. I mean, the White House has a discrepancy. So, you know, that would be a great place to start. The president should say, we're not going to tolerate, you know, wage discrepancies on a gender basis in the White House. That'd be a great place to start.
The last thing, who do you see right now going into caucus less than, gosh, it's less than 90 days at this point, as your central rival? Who are you kind of focusing, if I don't want to get into your tactics and expose any of that, but yeah, who are you looking at as kind of your main opponent right now in the Republican field?
I don't really look at anyone as the main opponent because, you know, you go back historically and you look particularly at the Iowa caucuses, this far out, whoever is leading never wins. And, you know, the last time around, the person who was in sixth place at this time won. So, you know, there's a lot of volatility, particularly in the last couple of weeks. So I think, you know, rather than, you know, make a whole bunch of alterations based on where you are in the polls, that you stay steady, stay the course, and you talk about what you've always been talking about. You don't try to change who you are. And I think the people will see that for what it is.
Thanks a whole bunch.
Absolutely.
You know, we love meeting people. We don't do any gotcha stuff. Blake's a lefty. I'm the right winger, and so we try. Yeah, we try to get a perspective from everybody. And we've had Ryan on the show before, and so we don't do any gotcha stuff. And I think that's, you know, he's organized this. Now, one of the things that last week you had a lot of foreign policy debate on Tuesday night. As far as I'm concerned, it was almost exclusively that. Now, do you think the focus on ISIS is distracting us from other foreign policy concerns, such as a resurgent Russia and a belligerent China?
Well, there's no question that those things are very important, and we shouldn't lose sight of them just because we're continuing to concentrate on, you know, radical Islamic jihadists, because we're going to be fighting with the jihadists for a long time to come. And if we don't also concentrate on the other areas of the world, we're going to find ourselves behind the eight ball. You know, one of the areas that I am particularly concerned about is our failure to engage in space. You know, we have to pay the Russians $77 million every time we want to send an astronaut up there. That's craziness. And when you look at all the innovations that came out of the space program, those were the things that kept us far ahead in military superiority. Your cell phone came out of there. And in the future, he who controls space will control the Earth.
You bring up an interesting point, and that is we're all kind of interlocked with the Russians. Do you have a plan that will kind of march the Russians back and make us much more independent as opposed to dependent upon the quote, New World Order?
Yes, I do. You know, one of the things you have to do is you have to look at what drives a person. You know, what's driving the jihadist movement? You know, having their caliphate, which gives them legitimacy. You have to understand that to know how to fight them. You have to look at Putin and recognize that he is a one-horse show. It is all about energy and oil prices. And that's what's keeping him under control right now. So a lot of our policy needs to be directed at keeping oil prices low so that you contain a lot of what he does. Doesn't mean that we don't also need to face him down in Syria and other parts of the world. Doesn't mean that we needn't have a much stronger showing throughout the Baltic Rim. You know, put some armored brigades in there, have some NATO exercises, particularly with Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Maybe even consider putting back in the missile shield. You know, giving the Ukrainians offensive weapons. Absolutely. We need to be aggressive. We shouldn't just sit around and wait for him to do things and react to them.
Well, then I guess the same question is going to be for China. How would you engage them, particularly with their belligerence in the South China Sea and with Japan?
Well, you know, the Chinese are not typically, you know, bellicose, warlike people. However, they are very pragmatic people. And if they see weakness, they will exploit it. So that's why you have to put up a strong defense. You know, we need, you know, to position, you know, our fleets there. We need to challenge them in that, but we need also to strengthen our relationships with all of our friends over there. You know, what's happening in the world right now is a lot of our traditional allies are questioning whether we are dependable. You know, we've turned our back on Israel. We had a gentleman's agreement with Ukraine that if they gave up their nuclear arsenal and something happened, we would be there. Were we there? Of course not. So people have good reason to doubt us right now.
Now, you mentioned oil a little bit ago. A big concern for many Iowans is the renewable energy sector. You've come out against energy subsidies in general, and I think you've said that you would like to get everybody off subsidies.
Yes.
How are you going to convince Iowans going into the caucus who are going to be benefiting from these subsidies? How are you going to convince them to get on board with you and your reduced subsidy and elimination of subsidy idea?
You know, I'm just going to tell it like it is. I'm going to say, I don't think the government should be picking and choosing who the winners and losers are based on who they're giving subsidies to. Things need to rise and fall on their own merits. You know, when it comes to, you know, renewable fuel subsidy, we have to recognize that here in Iowa, certain promises were made, and they extend out until 2022. So clearly, I think it would be unfair to pull the rug out before the obligations have been met. But everybody needs to be put on notice that the federal government, certainly in a Carson administration, would be in the process of withdrawing rather than increasing subsidies for anybody. Now, the advantage for Iowans is that there won't be any subsidies for petroleum either. So everybody's going to wind up on equal footing, and things will rise and fall based on their merits.
Now, I'm a big proponent of getting off of the oil standard, and I believe that's going to be in our national interest to get off the oil standard. Do you believe that the government, until the renewable energy sector is capable of replacing oil, do you think the government has a role in helping to fund the transition from oil to renewable energy?
I think the government has an obligation to get out of the way, but I think it's good to facilitate things. You know, we sit between two oceans. Can you imagine the amount of hydroelectric power that is available to us? You know, we should be concerned about that. But, you know, maybe some of the resources that are generated through the petroleum sector should be used by them, by the petroleum sector, to encourage exploration into some of these other areas. Because they need to recognize over the course of time that they're going to have to change also. And the government can help them to understand that and to realize that. But under no circumstances do we need the government insinuating itself into everybody's business. That is a huge problem for us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carson. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Hey, you know, I hear one of these guys is liberal and one is conservative. I couldn't tell which one was which. I love these guys. I hope you do too.
Thank you. Thank you.